Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive with us.
Yes.
And today we're looking at something you might not expect.
Okay.
The April 2025 newsletter from Shepard-Smith Compliance Consulting.
No.
Now, I know what you're thinking, a compliance newsletter.
Oh.
Riveting.
Yeah.
But trust me, this one is packed with interesting stuff,
I agree.
especially if you're working with grants research or public-private partnerships.
You know, it's so fascinating because Shepard-Smith, they really are the experts
Yes.
in navigating all of this stuff. They've got their fingers on the pulse of the regulations and the trends.
They do. And they're already hinting at some anticipated changes to 2 CFR 200.
Oh.
Likely related to DEI requirements. We'll have to keep an eye on that for a future deep dive.
For sure.
But for now,
Yeah.
let's talk about something a little more cheesy.
Cheesy.
Well, this newsletter mentions that April 12th is National Grilled Cheese Day.
Okay.
And it just so happens that their main topic this month is cost sharing.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Exactly. Cost sharing, the bread and butter of any successful project.
And the cheese.
Well, that's the exciting stuff, the project outcomes, the impact you're making. But before we get too hungry,
Right.
let's break down why Shepard-Smith thinks understanding cost sharing is going to be even more important in the coming years.
Yeah, they're predicting a rise in public-private partnerships,
Okay.
which means navigating the complexities of matching funds and contributions is going to be crucial for anyone looking to secure funding.
So whether you are applying for grants, managing projects, or collaborating with other organizations,
Yeah.
this is something you need to have on your radar.
Absolutely. And luckily, Shepard-Smith has provided a handy breakdown of key terms right in their newsletter.
Perfect. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is cost sharing?
Okay, so think of it like splitting a cost of a grilled cheese with a friend. You're each contributing a slice of bread. One slice is federal funding,
Got it.
and the other slice is your cost sharing.
And the cheese, tomato, and all the good stuff in the middle. Those are the project activities and outcomes, right?
Exactly. Now, sometimes your friend might say, hey, I really want extra cheese on this grilled cheese.
Okay.
You have to chip in a certain amount.
Right.
That's like a matching requirement where a specific level of cost sharing is mandated.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if I'm feeling generous and I offer to pay extra for even more cheese, even though my friend didn't ask?
That would be voluntary committed cost sharing.
Okay.
Going above and beyond the required contribution.
Right.
In the world of federal grants, though, this type of cost sharing doesn't hold as much weight,
Okay.
especially for research grants.
Interesting. So it's better to focus on meeting those matching requirements than just throwing extra money at the project?
Generally speaking, yes. Now imagine someone else walks by your grilled cheese feast and says, hey, I brought some chips and pickles, let's share.
Now we're talking.
Those chips and pickles represent third-party in-kind contributions,
Okay.
non-cash contributions from outside sources that add value to your project.
I love those generous pickle-bearing friends.
Yes.
So to recap, we've got our cost sharing, our matching requirements, our voluntary contributions,
Yeah.
and our third-party in-kind contributions.
Yeah.
What's the final piece of this cheesy puzzle?
That would be the project cost, which encompasses everything.
Okay.
The cost of both slices of bread, all the fillings,
Yeah.
plus the value of those chips and pickles.
Got it.
It's the total cost of making that delicious, impactful grilled cheese.
Okay, so we've got all the ingredients laid out now. Let's dive into the recipe.
Yes.
The actual regulations that govern cost sharing.
The newsletter points us to section 200.306,
Okay.
where things start to get really interesting.
Ooh, I love a good regulatory deep dive.
Yes.
Lay it on me.
Well, first off, any funds you're using for cost sharing, whether it's cash or those in-kind contributions, have to meet specific criteria to be considered acceptable.
Makes sense. We can't just be throwing random things into the mix and calling it cost sharing.
Right.
So what are these criteria?
The contributions need to be verifiable. Okay.
Meaning you have documentation to back them up.
Got it.
They also have to be necessary for the project, reasonable in cost, and aligned with the approved budget.
So I can't claim my vintage Porsche collection as a necessary project expense,
Probably not.
even though it is Porsche's 94th birthday this month, according to the newsletter.
Though a vintage Porsche might make for a very stylish cheese delivery vehicle.
Okay, fair enough. But seriously, valuing contributions can get a bit tricky, especially for things like services property or donated items.
That's right. Let's say you're donating a building for your project.
Okay.
The value you claim for cost sharing depends on how that building is being used.
Right.
If the federal award is specifically to help you acquire the building,
Yeah.
you can claim the full value. But if the award is for something else,
Okay,
and you're just using the building for the project, different rules apply.
so the context really matters. What about something smaller, like donating a used laptop or volunteering your time? Can those count? Those are great questions. And the answer, as with most things in the world of regulations, is it depends.
There we go.
Let's talk about the laptop first. You can definitely donate it,
Okay.
but the value you claim for cost sharing can't be more than its fair market value at the time of the donation.
So I can't say my old laptop is worth $1 million just because it has sentimental value,
Probably not.
even though it's older than the cell phone, which turns 52 this month.
Sentimentality doesn't translate to market value, unfortunately.
Okay. What about volunteer time? Say I have some expert-level grilled cheese making skills that would benefit a research project.
Well, for volunteer hours to count, the services need to be necessary for the project. If the project needs skills that your organization doesn't have in-house,
Yeah.
then volunteer hours from skilled professionals, maybe a grilled cheese consultant,
Okay.
could definitely be factored in.
And the value of those services would be based on what someone with those skills would typically get paid, right?
Exactly. It's all about being realistic and justifiable.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of what cost sharing is, the different types, and how contributions are valued.
Yeah.
But what happens when a project starts generating its own income? The newsletter mentions this intriguing concept called program income.
Program income. It's like finding a hidden stash of cheese curds in your pantry.
Okay.
It's a happy surprise that can really boost your project.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these cheese curds.
Right.
I mean, program income.
Well, program income is any revenue generated by the project itself beyond the initial funding.
Okay.
Think of it like this. You're making your delicious grilled cheese, and all of a sudden people start lining up, eager to buy your creation.
That's the dream.
Exactly. That money you make from selling those grilled cheeses would be considered program income.
So what do you do with this extra cheesy cash?
You have a few options, and the newsletter lays them out: deduction addition and cost sharing.
I'm sensing another analogy coming on.
You know me too well. Let's stick with our grilled cheese theme. With the deduction method, that program income basically lowers the overall cost of your grilled cheese operation.
Okay.
It's like getting a discount on your ingredients because your sandwiches are selling so well.
So you're essentially using your profits to reduce your expenses.
Right.
Clever.
Then there's the addition method. This is where that program income gets added on top,
Okay.
allowing you to expand your grilled cheese empire. You could buy a bigger griddle experiment with new cheeses. Maybe even hire a team of expert grilled cheesemakers.
Now you're talking. So the program income fuels even more deliciousness.
Exactly. And finally, we have the cost-sharing method. This is where that program income is used to cover your share of the costs.
Right.
That slice of bread you're contributing to the grilled cheese.
So instead of dipping into your regular budget to cover your share, you're using the project's own success to fund it.
Precisely. It's a great way to leverage program income to make your contribution even more impactful.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense, but I have a feeling there's more to uncover, especially when it comes to the specifics of what's allowed and what's not.
You're right. The newsletter dives into some pretty detailed regulations around contributions and donations,
Okay.
particularly when it comes to in-kind donations and volunteer services.
And I have a feeling those regulations might be more complicated than just figuring out the perfect cheese-to-bread ratio.
You could say that, but don't worry. We'll break it all down for you in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be back after a short break to unpack those cheesy details.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of cost sharing.
Yes.
Now, before we get lost in the finer points of regulations,
Okay.
let's recap where we left off. We were talking about program income.
Right. That delicious extra revenue the project can generate, like selling those amazing grilled cheese sandwiches we were talking about.
Exactly. And remember, there are 3 ways to handle a program income deduction addition, or using it toward cost sharing.
And we were just about to get into the nitty-gritty of contributions and donations, particularly when it comes to in-kind support and volunteer hours.
Ah, yes. The land of in-kind contributions, where things can get a bit tricky. The newsletter emphasizes one crucial point. You can't directly charge the value of donated services or property to a federal award.
So if someone donates a fancy cheese grater to my research project, I can't just bill the government for the cost of that grater.
That's correct. It's like trying to sneak an extra slice of cheese onto your sandwich without paying for it.
Sneaky, sneaky. But wait, didn't you say earlier that donated services could be factored into indirect cost rates for nonprofits?
Yes.
I'm a bit confused about how that works.
That's a great question, and it highlights an important nuance. While you can't directly charge for those donated services on a specific project,
Okay.
their value does get considered when calculating a nonprofit's overall indirect cost rate.
Okay, so remind me again, what are indirect cost rates?
Think of indirect costs as the behind-the-scenes expenses of your research project, things like keeping the lights on in the lab, paying administrative staff, or, yes, even accounting for the value of donated services.
Okay.
Nonprofits have a special rate to cover these costs, and that rate can be influenced by the value of volunteer work.
So going back to our cheesy analogy, it's like acknowledging that extra cheese exists, but spreading its cost across all the sandwiches you make, rather than just adding it to one specific order.
Exactly. And the newsletter emphasizes that this becomes particularly important when the value of donated services is what they call material.
Okay.
In other words, if a nonprofit relies heavily on volunteers, those contributions can significantly impact their indirect cost rate.
So it's all about being transparent and ensuring the accounting reflects the true cost of running those nonprofits. Makes sense.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about how the value of those donated services is actually determined.
Yeah. How do you put a price tag on someone's time and expertise?
It's not about randomly assigning a number.
Right.
The value needs to be consistent with what the organization would pay for similar services in the marketplace. So if a skilled graphic designer volunteers their time to create a logo for a nonprofit's research project, that nonprofit would need to figure out what a professional graphic designer in their area would typically charge for that same service.
So it's not about what the volunteer thinks their time is worth, but what the market dictates. Interesting.
Right, and if the organization can't find someone with those exact skills in their local market, they need to look at broader labor trends to determine a fair value. It's all about being reasonable and justifiable.
Got it. So we've covered a lot of ground here, cost-sharing program income and all the ins and outs of contributions.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should be aware of from this newsletter?
Well, aside from all the regulatory details,
Yeah.
Shepard-Smith does a great job of highlighting some other interesting news and events happening in April.
Oh, yeah, like that shout out to the Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach. Not exactly compliance related, but hey, we can't be all business all the time.
Exactly. But there are some other items that could be relevant to our listeners, like the news about the administration's potential changes to environmental regulations that could have a significant impact on research projects dealing with environmental issues.
Right, and the fact that the NIH is restructuring its peer review process is big news for anyone applying for those grants.
Yes.
It's a reminder that the world of research funding is constantly evolving.
It definitely is. And speaking of changes, let's not forget those cryptic hints about potential updates to 2 CFR 200.
Right.
While we don't have the specifics yet, it's a good reminder to stay informed about any regulatory shifts that might impact your work.
Knowledge is power, but for now I think it's time to shift gears and revisit our discussion of program income.
Ah, yes, those delightful cheese curds of financial success.
You know, I'm starting to really enjoy these cheesy analogies.
They do make these complex concepts a bit more digestible.
Yes, exactly. So remember, program income is any revenue a project generates beyond its initial funding, like selling those gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches we were talking about.
And remember, there are 3 main methods for handling program income deduction, addition, and cost sharing.
Right. And each method basically determines how that program income gets factored into the overall project budget.
Yes.
It's like deciding whether to reinvest your grilled cheese profits back into the research, use them to fund a celebratory pizza party for the team.
With grilled cheese sandwiches, of course.
Of course. Or maybe even split the profits among everyone involved.
A very generous approach. But in most cases, the choice of method is outlined in the terms and conditions of the federal award.
So it's not always up to the recipient to decide.
Exactly. And if no specific method is outlined, then the default is usually deduction. That means the program income is subtracted from the total allowable costs of the project, reducing the amount of federal funding needed.
It's like getting a discount on your research project, thanks to your own ingenuity.
Precisely. Now, the addition method, on the other hand, takes the opposite approach.
Okay.
Instead of reducing the overall cost of the project, the program income is added on top,
Okay.
increasing the total funding available.
More money for research. This sounds like the best option.
It can be, especially if the project has the potential to generate significant program income. It allows the project to expand its scope and achieve even greater outcomes. However, it's important to note that this method is typically only used in specific circumstances, such as when the program income is directly related to the project's goals and objectives.
So you wouldn't want someone using their grilled cheese profits to fund a completely unrelated project, like underwater basket weaving research.
Exactly. Focus is key.
Yeah.
Now, the third method, cost sharing, gets a bit more intricate. In this case, the program income is used to offset the organization's required cost-sharing contribution.
So it's like using those grilled cheese profits to pay for your slice of bread instead of dipping into your regular budget.
Precisely, this can be particularly advantageous for organizations with limited resources to meet those cost-sharing requirements.
Right.
It allows them to leverage the project's success to cover those costs.
Okay, I'm starting to see how program income adds another layer of complexity, but also opportunity to grant management.
Yeah.
It's like a financial puzzle where you have to figure out the best way to utilize those extra pieces.
That's a great way to put it. But for now, I think we've explored the cheesy depths of cost sharing and program income enough for one sitting.
Agreed. But don't go anywhere, listeners. We have a few final thoughts and a thought-provoking question to leave you with. So stay tuned for the exciting conclusion of our deep dive.
And we're back for a final part of our deep dive into cost sharing.
You know what I appreciate about Shepard-Smith's approach?
What's that?
They don't just bombard you with dry regulations, you know?
Right.
They weave in these really interesting tidbits about what's happening in the world. It's like they're saying, hey, we know compliance can be a bit dense, but it's all connected to this bigger, fascinating picture.
Exactly. Like, did you know that the first cell phone call was made on April 3rd, 1973?
Really?
And those early phones weighed over 2 pounds?
Seriously, I bet making a call felt like a workout. No wonder they weren't as popular back then.
Right. And you get this, April 6th is Scottish Tartan Day. Maybe we need to do a deep dive into the history of tartan next.
I would be down for that. I might need to brush up on my Scottish history a little bit.
Yeah.
Speaking of history, though, the newsletter also mentions Paul Revere's Midnight Ride happening on April 18th.
Right.
Imagine if he'd had one of those giant 1973 cell phones.
The British are coming. Hold on, let me find a signal.
That's hilarious. But in all seriousness, I think you're right. Those little historical and cultural references, they help connect these regulations to real life.
They remind us that these rules aren't just these abstract ideas. They shape and are shaped by the world around us.
And speaking of shaping the world, the newsletter also highlights some funding opportunities like the USDA Rural Development Grants and the Walmart Spark Local Grants.
Those are huge resources for organizations that are working in rural communities.
Yes.
It's good to see that there are initiatives that are really focused on, bridging the digital divide and supporting local businesses.
Absolutely. And the fact that those opportunities are mentioned alongside news about NIH funding changes and the growth of public-private partnerships, it really paints a picture of a very dynamic and evolving funding landscape.
For sure. It definitely underscores the importance of staying informed and adaptable.
I agree. So before we wrap up this deep dive, what stood out to you the most?
That's a good question. I think for me, it was the emphasis on understanding cost sharing, especially with the rise of these public-private partnerships. It's a reminder that securing funding is more than just a good proposal. It's about understanding the financial side and being prepared to contribute.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For me, it was realizing that even these topics like compliance can be connected to these broader trends and really fascinating stories. It's all about perspective.
I love that. And that brings us to our final thought-provoking question for you, dear listener. Given these changes in research, funding the focus on partnerships, the intricacies of cost sharing, what do you think the future holds for organizations seeking to make a difference?
That is a great question to ponder. And who knows, maybe we'll revisit it in a future deep dive, especially with those anticipated changes to 2 CFR 200.
We'll definitely keep you updated, but for now, we want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of compliance. We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little bit fun.
And remember, if you're ever feeling lost in the regulatory weeds, the experts at Shepard-Smith Compliance Consulting are there to help. They can guide you through even the most complex challenges.
Until next time, happy researching. And don't forget to celebrate National Grilled Cheese Day on April 12th.
It's the perfect way to fuel your next deep dive into the world of knowledge.